This Easter Friday, I'm bringing the message to you from Matthew 27. Cynthia read it well, and we're going to have a look at that passage today. As Jesus was nailed to the cross, there was a sign put on top of the cross that the Romans put on the cross. In fact, Pontius Pilate put on top of the cross. And the sign read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Now, the Jewish leaders protested that that sign should be put up there, but Pontius Pilate, I think in his wisdom, kept that sign there. It said a very significant statement about who Jesus claimed to be, the King of the Jews. Now, no one at the time when Jesus was being put on the cross, other than the disciples and the women who followed Jesus, actually really believed that. Certainly Pontius Pilate, I don't think, believed it. Certainly the Roman soldiers didn't believe it. Certainly the Pharisees and the Sadducees didn't believe it. And certainly the crowd who were calling for Jesus' blood didn't believe it. Even the thieves who were crucified with Jesus didn't believe that Jesus was the King of the Jews. But as Jesus was hanging on the cross, a number of miracles, supernatural events, occurred while he was hanging on the cross that changed not everyone's mind, but certainly some people's mind about the fact that Jesus' claims might actually be true. The first thing that happened as Jesus was hanging on the cross happened from 12 p.m. or 12 noon to 3 p.m. It says in Scripture that all of the land went dark. The sun was blotted out. Now, we don't know how that happened. We don't know why that happened. But all we know is it did happen. It was recorded that it happened. And they recorded as though this is something significant that had happened. And as people were mocking him, trying to get him to come off the cross, as the sun went dark, at least one person noticed that there was something different about Jesus. And that was one of the thieves that were hanging on the cross next to him. Because these thieves initially were like everyone else, mocking him and sort of saying, "Hey, Jesus, get off the cross and bring us with you," to defending Jesus while he was hanging there. Saying to the other thief, "Hey, we deserve to be here, but Jesus doesn't. He's done nothing wrong," is the statement that the thief makes. And then he turns to Jesus and says, "Jesus, remember me when you enter your glory." And Jesus says back to him, "I will see you today in paradise." That's pretty incredible, isn't it? The next thing that happened, that was another miracle that occurred, was as Jesus died, the thick curtain in the temple that separates the Holy of Holies from the other parts of the temple tore in two from top to bottom. Now, the curtain was at least one man's hand width thick. It was a thick curtain that was replaced every year. It wasn't as though it had been hanging there for centuries. It was replaced every year. It was a solid curtain. And not only that, but others who have researched the curtain have said that two horses pulling against one another with the curtain in the middle would not be able to couldn't tear the curtain. So when Jesus actually died on the cross and the curtain was torn from top to bottom, not only was it miraculous, but a statement was being made. No longer are we separated from the holy God, because Jesus has paid the price. He took on our sin. That's amazing. And yet it happened as Jesus died. The other thing that happened as Jesus died, and as recorded in Matthew, is that as he died, an earthquake shook the place. Rocks split apart and the tombs were opened, and godly men and women came out of the tombs alive. Now that is freaky. That is miraculous. That is spiritual. Something supernatural was occurring as Jesus died on that cross that day. It would have been an incredible sight and a very scary sight at the same time. Now, some people say, well, that's just nice myth. That's just how a story has grown over time. But these people wrote it in the people that wrote Matthew witnessed it. The people that wrote Matthew could have refuted it if it wasn't true. But it did happen. And we know that it affected people. We know that people, when Jesus had died, walked away silently. There was no joy in it. There was a real sense of mourning. Not only that, but one of the Roman soldiers, the Roman centurion who was in charge of putting the people on the crosses, who had probably done it for many years, knew what it was to see people being nailed to the cross and put on the cross and dying on the cross. He had seen so much awfulness in life because he was a Roman soldier. He had seen death, he had seen mayhem, he had seen carnage before. Not much would have shocked him, and yet when he saw Jesus die, not only was he in fear, but he also made this statement. He went from a person who was a cynic to the claims of Jesus, to a person who said, surely this was the Son of God. There has to be a reason that he made that statement. Romans don't make that statement, particularly centurions, easily. And yet he did. Easter, the Easter story, is more than just a nice story. It's a proclamation of the power and the authenticity of who Jesus claimed to be, the Son of God. The question for us, sitting 2,000 years later, is this, do we believe it? Are we prepared to investigate it and trust it in our lives? Are we prepared to ask the deep questions? Is Jesus truly the Messiah, the Son of God who died for our sins? That's a choice that you have to make. And I'm praying that you will make it. Because Jesus, yes, he died on the cross, and yes, he was put in the tomb. But as we come up to Resurrection Sunday, it's called Resurrection Sunday for a reason. He rose again 3 days later, just as he said. Look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Thank you for listening.